WWF No Mercy for the Nintendo 64 has been regarded as not only one of the best WWE games ever, but also one of, if not the best wrestling video game of all time. It sold very well, it was loved by many, but even with all this success, it was the last WWE game to be developed by Aki. Many have wondered for years now, why did this happen? And from all those discussions came a rumour that there was another Aki WWE game being developed that got cancelled. The game was supposedly called WWF Backlash, and you've probably heard it all before. It was going to be released in late 2001, it was going to have Hell in a Cell matches, 30% complete, 6-man tag matches, there was an image of the game in a magazine, and so on. Except all of this is completely untrue. WWF Backlash never existed, and breaking news, everything you've heard over the last 20 years was a lie. There was never another game planned, and in this video I'm going to go over why everything mentioned was completely made up and finally put this 20-year-long rumour to rest. One of the supposed reasons for the cancellation of this WWF Backlash game was that it was being developed too late into the N64's life cycle, and I heard something along the lines of Nintendo told them to cancel the game because of that reason, even though Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 released in 2002 and other games were released in late 2001, so that reason doesn't make any sense at all. Another reason I've seen for Backlash's cancellation was that Aki and THQ had no idea that the GameCube was coming along and had to put an end to their 30% completed game once they found out about it. The problem with this rumour was that the GameCube development kits were going out as early as May 1999, months before the release of Aki's first WWF game, WrestleMania 2000. And also the GameCube was revealed publicly in August 2000, which was also months before No Mercy's release. The GameCube was obviously quite a big deal at the time, so THQ and Aki definitely knew that the GameCube was around. Trust me on that one. Another one of the rumours about Backlash that went around was that it was planned to feature a WCW ECW roster. If you didn't know already, both companies were purchased by the WWF, and many of the talent joined the WWF and took part in the invasion angle. There is a big problem with that rumour. SmackDown Just Bring It released in late 2001, and Raw for the Xbox released in early 2002. Neither of these games featured any of the new signings like Booker T or RVD, so the likelihood of them being in Backlash would be the same as the game itself. Non-existent. You might be wondering, if the game never existed, why did so many think it did then? I wouldn't blame anyone for thinking it did exist. I mean, I did too for a while. Like, for example, the No Mercy Wikipedia entry to this very day still says that Backlash was a real thing that was happening, so it is easy for rumours to spread when it's stated on such big websites. It's also unknown where the rumour originated from, but I do know from searching on Google that people were talking about this Backlash N64 game in 2005. So what actually did happen? Well, thanks to 2 podcast interviews with No Mercy's producer Sanders Keel, who was working for THQ at the time, we got those answers. Before I do get into this, I totally recommend watching both interviews as they are full of interesting information about WWE games from around that time. What I'm talking about here is just like 1% of the interviews, so I've made sure to link both podcast interviews in the description, so do make sure to check them out. So thanks to those interviews, we finally found out that No Mercy was always planned to be the last WWE game developed by Aki, as they were going to work with EA on a WCW video game. The reason why Aki didn't stick around with THQ was because of a mix of corporate issues with both Aki and THQ at the time, along with Aki no longer wanting to develop exclusively on Nintendo consoles. They wanted to also develop for PlayStation consoles too, but with THQ having a committed relationship with Yuke's for developing PlayStation WWE games, it was never going to be possible. So Aki going to develop the WCW game, which didn't get too far into development due to WCW being purchased by the WWE in March 2001. And I'm sure EA were left thinking, well, what the hell do we do with this amazing development team that make wrestling games when there's no other big wrestling organisations now? That all led to the creation of the legendary Def Jam series, so it did all work out in the end. But the story isn't over just yet. Going back to THQ, they had Dukes for SmackDown games on the PS2, Anchor Inc. for Xbox games, but they were left without a development team for GameCube games. It was eventually decided that another Dukes team would develop this series, which even included former Aki staff. Now this is purely speculation on my behalf, but to me it feels like with the cancellation of the WCW game, people at Aki were maybe left thinking, well, what do we do now? And with THQ having an upcoming wrestling game for the GameCube, Aki being wrestling developers, and THQ knowing that people wanted a Aki feel to remain on the Nintendo WWE games, it made sense that Aki staff would make the jump over to Yuke's to work on what would become WrestleMania 18, which would start development in July 2001. And although it started rough, with WrestleMania 18 being not so good, the games on the GameCube would get better and better, and feel more worthy of being spiritual successors to the Aki games. With Day of Reckoning 2, which is was also the last Nintendo exclusive WWE game ever, being one of the greatest wrestling games ever made in my opinion. So that was the entire story of the myth that was WWF Backlash for the N64. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all on the next video.